Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Wednesday, January 31st, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Biden decided how to respond to the drone attack. So President Biden told reporters on Tuesday that he's decided on a response to the drone attack that hit a U.S. base in northeastern Jordan near the Syrian border and killed 3 U.S. troops, but he did not specify what that response will be. So even though, as I covered yesterday, the Pentagon has admitted it has no evidence Iran was involved in the attack, Biden says that he holds Iran responsible because it arms the Shia militias the U.S. believes launched the drone. So, regardless of that, the lack of evidence, the U.S. is considering targeting the Iranian military. So, U.S. officials told Politico that options being considered include attacks on Iranian personnel in Iraq and Syria or striking Iranian naval assets. So, they could bomb the IRGC in Iraq or Syria or bomb the Iranian Navy. And those things risk a huge escalation. This idea that because they're not going to, I guess they're thinking, all right, we won't bomb targets inside Iran. We'll hit the Iranians around the region. Like, that's not going to escalate things. I mean, you know, they're doing this and claiming that they don't want war, but this is what they're planning. And it says those are just some of the options being considered. But I saw that in a few reports that's one of the options. So I am leaning toward that's probably what they're going to do, is target the IRGC in Iraq, Syria, or hit the Iranian Navy. And John Kirby, the White House National Security Council spokesman, he said that it was very possible that the U.S. would carry out what he called a tiered approach, not just a single action, but potentially multiple actions, signaling that the U.S. could carry out strikes for multiple days, you know, that this could be not just one round of airstrikes, but a pretty significant attack. And I'm guessing if they targeted the Iranians, they would also target the Shia militias as well. So, again, while the U.S. is considering an attack on the Iranian military, they're also claiming that they don't want war, that they don't want a wider war in the Middle East, that they don't seek escalation. But President Biden has already launched a wider war in the region by bombing the Houthis in Yemen 10 times since January 12th and launching several rounds of airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. They've done that already against the militias. And every time they do it, each strike, they say, oh, we don't want escalation. This is for deterrence. Well, it's deterred nothing. Tensions have only increased. Now American troops have been killed. So, if they go with some big attack on Iranian assets in the region, I mean, this could mean war between the U.S. and Iran. All right, so the next one here is kind of an interesting story. Kataib Hezbollah suspends military operations against the U.S. So Kataib Hezbollah, which is one of the main Shia militias in Iraq, they have announced that they are suspending operations against U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria. Kataib Hezbollah said in a statement, quote, "We announced the suspension of military and security operations against the occupation forces," end quote. The group said that it was suspending these operations because it did not want to cause embarrassment to the Iraqi government. So it sounds like they're saying they're stopping this because the Iraqi government wants them to stop, and they're right now negotiating a potential U.S. withdrawal from Iraq. But the timing, right after this drone attack is interesting. And the Pentagon has said it's going to ignore this announcement, which isn't a surprise. They said, actions speak louder than words. American troops are already dead. Now, the U.S. has said that this attack that killed the 3 Americans had the footprints of Kataib Hezbollah, but they have not officially blamed Kataib Hezbollah. Even though, I guess they are blaming them, but they haven't, they haven't showed evidence that they're involved. And it's also So a lot of these attacks on U.S. bases in Iraq and Syria have been claimed by this group, the Islamic Resistance in Iraq, which is kind of an umbrella group of these Shia militias. So it's not exactly clear which militias are behind which attacks. I think that that's purposeful. But the U.S. has launched airstrikes against Kataib Hezbollah. So it's a group that they have targeted. They've targeted them, over the past few years quite a bit, and in the recent airstrikes as well. So according to Al Mayadeen, Kataib Hezbollah said that Iran was not involved in its operations. The group's leader, Abu Hussein al-Hamidawi, said, quote, "Our brothers in the axis of resistance, especially in Iran, do not know the specifics of our jihadist work, and they have repeatedly declared opposition to our escalation against the U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria," end quote. So saying that Iran has expressed opposition to what they're doing. So he said Kataib Hezbollah would continue to work to defend Gaza through other means. So Kataib Hezbollah, they were founded in 2003 after the U.S. invaded Iraq, and they were actually on the same side as the U.S. in the war against ISIS when ISIS, actually controlled a lot of territory. And Kataib Hezbollah is part of the Popular Mobilization Forces, which is a militia coalition that's part of Iraq's security forces. That's part of the Iraqi military that falls under the command of the Iraqi government. And the U.S. has been bombing the PMF recently. So it just shows just what a mess the whole situation is and what a mess U.S. intervention in Iraq is. So this is part of the reason why the Iraqi government has been so angry at the U.S. over these airstrikes, is because they actually killed a deputy PMF commander. And when the U.S. killed Qasem Soleimani, the Iranian Quds Force commander, in 2020 in a drone strike in Baghdad, he was killed alongside, I forget his full name, but al-Muhandis. Al-Muhandis was he was a deputy commander of the PMF, and he was the leader of Kataib Hezbollah at the time. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu rejects Gaza pullout for hostage deal. So Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Tuesday again rejected the idea of withdrawing from Gaza and releasing thousands of Palestinian prisoners as part of a hostage deal with Hamas, and vowed that his massacre would continue. Netanyahu said, quote, "We will not remove the IDF from the Gaza Strip, and we will not release thousands of terrorists. None of this will happen. What will happen? Absolute victory," end quote. So Hamas has offered to release all the remaining hostages in exchange for a permanent ceasefire and an Israeli withdrawal. But Netanyahu has repeatedly vowed that the slaughter in Gaza will continue and could extend into 2025. The latest numbers, over 26,000 Palestinians killed. It's getting close to 27,000, the numbers that the Gaza Health Ministry is putting out, and that includes over 10,000 children. So despite this impasse, you have Hamas saying, we'll release the hostages if permanent withdrawal, permanent ceasefire, and Netanyahu saying, absolutely not. The two sides are still negotiating through Qatari and Egyptian mediators. Ismail Haniyeh, who is Hamas's senior political leader, he's based in Qatar, he said on Tuesday that he is reviewing the latest proposal that was discussed by the U.S., Israel, Qatar, and Egypt over the weekend. If you remember, William Burns, the CIA director, was in Paris and met with the head of Mossad, Qatar's prime minister, and Egypt's intelligence chief. And this is the proposal Hamas is looking at. And this Hamas leader said that they're open to discussing any serious initiatives, but he again reaffirmed the call for the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. And this proposal that he's reviewing, it includes 3 phases, and the last phase would involve Hamas releasing the last of its Israeli hostages, which at that point would be the soldiers. That's what they're holding out for, the soldiers last. They want to get a lot in return for the soldiers. And how many Palestinians would be released in exchange for the Israelis, that's something that still has to be negotiated. And they didn't specify how long the ceasefire or truce would be to facilitate this deal, but there's been these reports that they're talking about a 2-month truce or 1 month. But then again, it's hard to believe that Netanyahu's going to agree to something like that. But we'll see how it all shakes out. All right, so the next one here, Israeli defense minister says troops will go into action very soon in Lebanon. So this article is from Jason Ditz, and it says, efforts by the U.S. to head off an Israeli war in southern Lebanon, a conflict U.S. military intelligence has warned Israel may be unable to handle, may be failing, as Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is telling troops that the offensive will start very soon. Gallant made the comments while visiting Israeli troops in the Gaza Strip, and he tried to spin this as the Israelis reinforcing their troops in northern Israel. And his comments came after Israel's military chief predicted the conflict in Lebanon was very likely in the coming months, and after the northern military commander said the tens of thousands of troops were ready to mount an offensive. Israel has been launching tit-for-tat strikes with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon for several months, and top Israeli politicians seem to be spoiling for yet another fight, downplaying the U.S. military assessments that the two fronts at the same time would stretch Israel dangerously thin. And one of the reasons, that is true. It's hard to believe that Israel could handle like a full-blown war with Hezbollah while everything that they have going on in Gaza. But I think their thinking is that if this does happen, the U.S. would probably get involved. So tension's still very high on that Israel-Lebanon border. All right. And remember, I mentioned this a lot, but there was a report that said U.S. officials were worried that Netanyahu might see war in Lebanon as key to his political survival. War in Lebanon, more war expanded in the region is something that is certainly in Netanyahu's interest here. All right. So the next one here, Israeli forces dressed as medics raid hospital in Jenin, killing 3. So Israeli commandos disguised as medics, patients, and other Palestinian civilians raided a hospital in the occupied West Bank city of Jenin on Tuesday morning in footage widely shared online. The soldiers killed 3 people inside Jenin's Ibn Sina hospital. Footage shared online and in Israeli media showed around a dozen Israeli soldiers in the hospital armed with assault rifles. Hamas responded to the attack, saying that Israel's crimes will not go unanswered, and said that the killings were a continuation of the occupation's ongoing crimes against Palestinians. So the 3 men have been identified as Mohammed Jalamna and 2 brothers, Basil and Mohammed al-Ghazawi. According to Israeli media, the raid took around 10 minutes and took place at 5:30 a.m. One of the Israeli commandos was speaking Arabic at the time of the raid. Meanwhile, the Israeli military said that one of the Palestinians was a Hamas member. The raid left parts of the hospital destroyed, with beds upturned and bloodstains covering the floor and equipment. The director of the hospital told Middle East Eye that some of the Israeli commandos were also dressed as nurses and drew their weapons as soon as they entered the hospital. They entered one of these guys' rooms, despite the fact that he was receiving treatment for wounds that he sustained on October 25th. So they walked in while these guys were in bed in the hospital and shot him in the head with silencers. So the video is crazy. I mean, you see, I think they say it's about a dozen Israelis dressed up, a lot of them as women. That's a common disguise that they use, and coming in with rifles, and I guess they just went into the room, pop, 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 and then they got out of there. So, it's just another example of them turning a hospital into a war zone here. And, there's some, I got to look at it again. I saw briefly before I started recording that Matt Miller, the State Department spokesman, was asked about this and basically said, it's okay by us that they're raiding hospitals and shooting people in their beds. So, that's the U.S. stance on this. Basically, he said that he thinks it's good that they can target Hamas, go after Hamas members. All right, so the next one here, Hamas reasserts control over areas of northern Gaza. So Hamas militants have returned to northern Gaza and are mobilizing against Israeli forces and establishing a system of governance. This was reported by The Guardian on Tuesday, and they cited Israeli officials, Gaza residents, and aid officials. They had a quote from Ayel Hulata, who's a former Israeli national security advisor. He was, I believe, until the Netanyahu government came in. He was in the previous government. Now he's got a job working for the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which is a very hawkish American think tank. But he said, quote, "We are hearing more, unfortunately, of the recovery of an insurgency in both central and northern Gaza. We're hearing more and more that Hamas are doing policing in northern Gaza and governing trade, and that is a very bad outcome," end quote. The Israeli military recently withdrew from some areas of the northern Gaza Strip and claimed that it had taken out Hamas's military structure in the area, saying that only pockets of resistance were left. But the reemergence of organized Hamas members in the area highlights the Palestinian group's resilience and the unrealistic nature of Netanyahu's goal of eradicating Hamas. If you see this map from South Front here, what's highlighted in red is controlled by Palestinians, controlled by Hamas. And you see in the north, Gaza City is mostly under Hamas control, it looks like, if this map is accurate. So The Guardian also quoted Michael Milstein of the Institute for National Security Studies, which is a think tank in Israel. And he said that Hamas had survived Israel's operations in northern Gaza, which include, I mean, they dropped a ton of bombs on northern Gaza, and they had the ground invasion there too. I said a ton of bombs, but they probably dropped a few thousand tons of bombs. So anyway, he said, quote, "Hamas control these areas. There is no chaos or vacuum because it is the workers of Gaza municipality or civil rescue defense forces who are effectively part of Hamas who are enforcing public order. Hamas still exists. Hamas has survived." The IDF version is that the northern part of Gaza, the basic military structure of Hamas, was broken. That only works with a conventional army, but not for a flexible guerrilla operation like Hamas. We are already seeing individuals as snipers, setting booby traps, and so on, end quote. So we also, I think I covered this yesterday, that U.S. and Israeli officials are saying they've only destroyed 80% of Hamas's tunnels, which is a key part of their infrastructure. And that's how they're able to pop back up in the north. Even if Israel's controlling the territory surrounding it, they're able to go through the tunnels. So it just goes to show how even the sheer scale of destruction in northern Gaza wasn't enough to defeat Hamas there. The more the Palestinian men, young men whose whole families are being killed and wiped out, what do you expect? What do you think they're going to do? Even if they don't join Hamas, there's other militant groups. I'm sure they can get their hands on a rifle or something to fight the invading Israelis. All right, so the next one here. Israel fails to produce evidence to justify cemetery destruction. So this article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. And it says the Israeli military granted CNN a 3-hour tour inside the Gaza Strip to view the destruction of Palestinian cemeteries. The outlet explained that the evidence presented by the IDF did not confirm Tel Aviv's claims about tunnels under the graveyard. Across Gaza, Israel has damaged over a dozen cemeteries. So CNN had this big report about Israel's destruction of 16 cemeteries in Gaza. And so they let CNN in, and they're like, "Oh, we'll show you this one cemetery, and you'll see that we needed to dig up the bodies because there was a Hamas tunnel under it." But CNN saying that they didn't show them evidence to support the claim. The CNN reporter explained that the evidence presented by the IDF actually suggested there was no tunnel beneath the cemetery. The IDF invited him into Gaza after he reported that the Israeli military operations had damaged 16 cemeteries. Because I know the CNN got into Gaza escorted by the Israeli military before that. And so that was one that they saw so this is before the initial report was CNN saw a cemetery that was destroyed while they were in Gaza. And then using kind of satellite data and pictures from Palestinians on the ground, they found 15 other cemeteries that were destroyed. And there's a quote here from Janina Dill, co-director at Oxford University's Institute for Ethic, law and armed conflict, saying that the desecration of burial sites could be the evidence of genocide. The total disregard for the dead in Gaza, I think certainly adds to the South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice. All right, so the next one here, EU plans to sabotage Hungary's economy for Ukraine. So this is a really insane story, at least to me, it seems insane. The EU, and this was reported by Financial Times, the EU is planning to sabotage Hungary's economy if Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban blocks a 50 billion euro aid package to Ukraine at a summit of EU leaders that will happen on Thursday. The plan has been outlined by EU officials in a document obtained by Financial Times, and it looks to exploit Hungary's economic weaknesses, hurt its currency, and scare off investors to hurt jobs and growth in the country. So that's what they want to do to Hungary, a fellow EU nation that does not want to go along with the proxy war in Ukraine. If Orban does not lift his veto of Ukraine aid, the EU plans to cut off all funding to Hungary. Without that funding, the document says that financial markets and European and international companies might be less interested in investing in Hungary, and that could quickly trigger a further increase of the cost of funding of the public deficit and a drop in the currency. An EU diplomat speaking to Financial Times admitted that the plan to pressure Hungary is blackmail. And in response to the report, Hungary's envoy to the EU said that Budapest does not give in to pressure and would continue to negotiate on the issue with the EU. And I know in some cases with some of the Ukraine stuff, Orban's held out a little bit or sanctions on Russia, things like that, and kind of quickly gone along. But they've been trying to get this $50 billion euro aid package pushed through for a long time now. And I believe Slovakia's new leader has also said he's going to oppose this. So, if two countries are vetoing it, that could be more significant. Are they going to try to sabotage Slovakia's government too? So this 50 billion euro aid package that the EU wants to give Ukraine would be dispersed over 4 years. And this is supposed to basically fund the Ukrainian government. And Ukraine has said without this aid or without the American aid, if it doesn't get approved, they might have to make cuts to salaries for government workers. It could delay pensions. These are the kind of things that the U.S. and the EU have been funding in Ukraine, paying pensions for government workers and things like that. All right. So the next one here. NATO chief visits the U.S. to push for Ukraine aid. So this one is another one from Kyle. And it says, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg is in the U.S. this week to push for Congress to pass a massive $61 billion aid package for Ukraine proposed by the White House. The supplemental defense spending bill has been stalled in Congress for several months. So he brought Taiwan into the argument. He said that, if you don't help Ukraine, Taiwan is next. And I guess he's doing that to appeal to the Republican China hawks. So Stoltenberg said at a press conference in the U.S. with Blinken, quote, "It will be a tragedy for Ukrainians if President Putin wins, but it will also make the world more dangerous and all of us more insecure. It will embolden other authoritarian leaders, not only President Putin, but also North Korea, Iran, and China to use force. Today it's Ukraine. Tomorrow it could be Taiwan," end quote. So just trying to tie it all together. If you don't stop Putin in Ukraine, he's going to roll into D.C., kind of that narrative. All right, so the last one here. The U.S. is going to deploy nuclear weapons to the U.K. This was reported by The Telegraph, citing Pentagon documents that said the U.S. will deploy nuclear weapons to the U.K. for the first time in 15 years, in a move that Russia will obviously view as a provocation. So Pentagon procurement contracts show that the U.S. is planning to station B-6112 nuclear warheads at RAF Lockheath, which is a base in Suffolk, England. The U.S. pulled its nuclear weapons out of the U.K. back in 2008, and this decision just really goes to show the low and sorry state of U.S.-Russia relations, that the U.S. is deploying more nukes to Europe, to the U.K., of all places. And according to the Telegraph, Russia said that a U.S. deployment of nukes to the U.K. would be an escalation and would require countermeasures. So the U.S. already has nukes stationed in Germany, Belgium, Italy, Turkey, and the Netherlands as part of NATO's nuclear sharing program. Last year, Russia announced that it was deploying nuclear weapons to Belarus amid the tensions over the proxy war in Ukraine. And Putin pointed to NATO's nuclear sharing program to justify his decision. So the B-61 is the U.S.'s primary nuclear gravity bomb that they drop out of planes. And the B-61-12 is the newest iteration. It's considered a tactical nuclear weapon, which means they're not as powerful as strategic nuclear weapons, but the B-61-12 has a maximum yield of 50 kilotons, which is huge. That is more than 3 times as powerful as the bomb that the U.S. dropped on Hiroshima. So what's just weird about this is that the UK has nukes. They have their own nuclear arsenal. And they actually announced back in 2021 that they're expanding their nuclear arsenal, even though they are signatories to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They said that they were raising the ceiling of the number of nuclear warheads allowed in their stockpile from 180 to 240. The UK also said that they would no longer publish information about the number of warheads that it maintains in an operational status. And I linked to a write-up from Arms Control Association about when the UK made this announcement, which got very little attention. You know, you just feel like if another country that the US was not allies with announced it was building more nukes, it would be big news. And, you know, they're saying that it sounds like it would, you know, raises questions at least about their commitment to the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Nick Turse, Remote Warfare and Expendable People. One from Scott Horton, the USA keeps fighting for Iran. Just his brief overview of how U.S. wars in the Middle East have actually benefited Iran, like the invasion of Iraq. The involvement of Syria got them much more involved and closer to Bashar al-Assad. Things like that. Very, very good information, especially when we're talking about Kataib, Hezbollah, and ISIS and the PMF and all this stuff. So please go check that out. We have one from Ramzi Baroud. Is the EU a direct partner in the Israeli genocide in Gaza? One from Paul R. Pillar. Bring U.S. troops home from Iraq and Syria now. I certainly agree with that. Our spotlight is from Brad Pierce. Western media's blackout of Israel's Hannibal Directive. This is an important one because there has been very little attention about this big report from Ynet or the Hebrew version of Ynet, the Israeli news site, about how Israel ordered the Hannibal Directive on October 7th. And it was mainly about cars that Hamas was trying to get back into Gaza. They were just opening fire on, and even if there's Israeli hostages. So basically proof that the Israelis did indeed kill some Israeli civilians on October 7th or in the days following, when there were still, you know, some Hamas guys in southern Israel. And I covered it. I covered it. I've kind of relied on the few media outlets that have covered it in English, which is the alternative media outlets. The story that we ran on it that I covered was Electronic Intifada. I know the Gray Zone has covered this stuff a lot. Mondo Weiss, also The Cradle. We had a story on that because before this big investigation came out, there was kind of a preliminary thing in Israeli media that I think got even less attention about the Hannibal Directive, and The Cradle had something on that. So, but anyway, go check it out from Brad. It's at the Libertarian Institute. It's definitely a very important story. Anyway, that is it for me for today. You could always support this show by sharing it, like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Hopefully, I don't know, I think it could happen soon, Biden's response. There's indications that it could happen within the next day or two. So we'll see how it all shakes out. That's it. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thanks for listening.